Welcome to Wednesday's edition of COVID-19. I'm Min San-hee. It's been almost a month since Korea adopted a relaxed daily life quarantine framework, but the number of daily infections has been on the rise in recent days. A reminder that efforts to keep the virus at bay should take place at individual levels. We have more on that later on the program, but for now, we have the headlines with our Kwon So-ah and Noaram.
Hi.
Hello. Now, so I understand our daily number of infections is on the rise.
Yes, we are just a hair below the 50 mark today, which is the number authorities see as a manageable level where people can carry out their normal routines while the government's efforts on containment. Now, let's take a closer look at the figures. We have 49 new cases, 1 fatality, 27 additional patients or people in quarantine, and 21 newly recovered people. And taking a look at our map, we have 48 cases in the metropolitan area out of the 49 cases, 19 in the capital Seoul, 17 in Incheon, and 12 in Gyeonggi-do province, and just 1 case down south in Daegu. And out of these cases, 3 cases were imported cases.
Right. Now, despite the situation and the concerns, of course, I understand phase 3 of the resumption of offline classes was on track today.
Yes, and officials acknowledged parents and students' concerns about offline classes due to several infections that were traced back to religious gatherings, cram schools, as well as cases stemming from unidentified sources. But as Vice Health Minister Kim Kang-nip said at today's regular briefing, authorities are taking all-out efforts to prevent a school outbreak, noting that although there have been a few cases where students and faculty members tested positive since schools first reopened, those were linked to other community spreads, meaning so far there has been not a single outbreak within schools, and this due to the strict quarantine measures. And this Wednesday, high school freshmen, middle school sophomores, and elementary students in the 3rd and 4th grade returned to their classrooms. The 4th and last resumption is set for Monday. Meanwhile, the number of schools that canceled their reopening dropped by 15 schools compared to yesterday to 519 institutions, according to the Education Ministry.
Right, so what are the updates around the world then?
Well, let's start off with an overall look around the globe. Almost 6.5 million cases have been now reported across the world, with more than 380,000 fatalities, and over 3 million people have now recovered. And taking a closer look at the major outbreaks, we have more than 1.8 million cases in the U.S., followed by Brazil with over 558,000 cases, and then we have Russia in the 400,000s, followed by Spain, the UK, and Italy. And what's also notable is that India now surpassed the 200,000 mark, and France and Germany do not have a big change compared to the recent days, still in the 180,000s. And we have Turkey and Iran between 150,000 and 160,000.
Let's move to Bangladesh, where the first coronavirus death of a refugee is raising alarm bells there.
Right. Around 1 million refugees live in the camps of South Bangladesh, and with a 71-year-old Rohingya refugee becoming the first one to die from COVID-19, officials are concerned this could be just the beginning. Now, reports on Tuesday said the elderly man of the Muslim minority group was confirmed to have died on May 31st while he was being treated at an isolation center at the refugee camp. He was known to have suffered from other health conditions, and he was residing at the largest shelter with more than 600,000 people who have to share washing facilities and toilets in large numbers amid the ongoing pandemic. At least 29 Rohingya have been confirmed with the virus so far since the first case was detected on May 14th. Meanwhile, 15,000 refugees were quarantined last week there, with around 340 screenings conducted so far. Bangladesh, meanwhile, one of the poorest and most densely populated countries in the world, has some 60,000 infections and 700 fatalities.
Right, over in France, I hear there's been both good and bad news following the country's most recent easing of restrictions.
Right, May 2nd was the second phase of an easing of France's strict lockdown that was imposed around mid-March and started to relax before mid-May. And that includes a lifting of a 100-kilometer travel ban, and residents in green zones are now permitted to go to restaurants and cafes, which is the majority of regions in France. But Paris is in the so-called orange zone, where outside areas can open, such as parks and gardens. Schools have also opened in phased steps under strict measures such as mandatory mask wearing and limiting the number of students in one classroom. And now going to the bad and good news you mentioned, Sonny. While the number of people hospitalized declined by more than 260 on Tuesday, with the number of patients in intensive care dropping by 49, the death toll rose by more than 100 for the first time in almost 2 weeks. And France is the country with the 5th highest number of fatalities in the world.
All right, Swa, thank you for that. I'll come back to you after the regular briefing.
All right.
Meanwhile, Aram, Korea CDC will get a bump in status, I hear.
That's right. The KCDC will be promoted to a central administrative organization. It is currently an agency under the Health Ministry at the moment. Once promoted, the KCDC will be dubbed the Disease Control and Prevention Service. That's roughly translated to English. It will be able to operate its own budget, staff and structure independently from the Health Ministry. The new body will also have more authority over executing policies related to infectious diseases, as well as overseeing research and projects on disease management. Now, the aim of the promotion is to enable a quicker response to infectious diseases by cutting out the middleman, essentially. But in emergency situations, when pan-government cooperation is required, both the new body and the Health Ministry will work in tandem. There will also be some changes to the Health Ministry itself. Multiple vice ministerial posts will be allocated to have one vice minister in charge of health affairs, while another handles the welfare sector. Now, the government is slated to propose the revision to Parliament soon.
And the government has drawn up the country's largest ever extra budget to battle the pandemic.
That's right. This year's third supplementary budget plan is worth 35.3 trillion won, which is roughly 28 billion US dollars. It's not only the largest budget, but also the first time in 48 years that 3 extra budgets have been drawn up in a year. Now, of course, it seeks to shore up the slumping economy and lay the groundwork for post-pandemic growth. And the government endorsed the plan during an extra cabinet meeting earlier today and will submit it to Parliament on Thursday. The new National Assembly is on course to convene its opening meeting on Friday, but it remains to be seen whether the opposition party will be present for that opening. The United Future Party says it will agree to the chamber's opening only if the ruling party gives up key committee head posts, which is a sticking issue between the rival parties at the moment. The government is seeking to have the bill pass within this month. Now, once approved, the government plans to spend more than 75% of the extra budget within the following 3 months.
I see over in the US, public protests rage on amid fears of further COVID-19 outbreaks.
That's right. One of America's top health officials is warning that the protests could cause a rebound in cases in the world's worst hit country. Now, Surgeon General Jerome Adams added that although many have been wearing masks, just the sheer number of people gathering together still poses a risk of further infections. Thousands of demonstrators are pouring onto the streets all across the United States to protest the death of George Floyd, as we've seen a lot in the headlines recently. Adams, who is African-American himself, also noted that the pandemic has disproportionately affected people of color. He said he understands the anger, but urged protesters to channel that anger into meaningful steps forward for both racial reform and to help curb the spread of the virus. Adams is just the latest government official to express concern. He and other officials are trying to find a delicate balance between advising Americans during this pandemic as well as raising awareness of racism hurting black communities.
Right, Aram, thank you for that. We'll see you again tomorrow. It's a little after 2 p.m. here in Korea, and we are poised to join the regular afternoon briefing on COVID-19 here in this part of the world. Given the rise in infections in recent days, health authorities are renewing calls on members of the public to refrain from unnecessary visits to places that expose them to to high risks of infection, including confined entertainment establishments, venues of worship, that is, and cram schools, among other congested areas. Meanwhile, regulations on the purchase of government-sponsored face masks have been eased. For those in need, you can buy them on any date of the week. Granted, you can still only buy 3 per week, but for the young, those below the age of 18, the purchase can be 5 per week. Now, this is to ensure that offline classes will take place safely. Speaking of masks also, remember that you are required to wear them on all public transportations here in Korea, including airplanes. And if you do not have them on, operators have the authority to ask you to leave. Now, the resumption of schools, as our SOA mentioned, is on phase 3, that is, and sophomores in high schools, 8th graders in middle schools, and 3rd and 4th graders in primary schools are returning to classrooms. Again, there is much emphasis on the wearing of face masks to ensure a safe offline learning experience. They will be, of course, blending both offline and online classes during this particular period. As we continue to wait for the briefing, perhaps we can take a look at the figures for today here in Korea. As Soa mentioned, we have 49 new cases, raising our total to 11,590, that is. Meanwhile, on the screen, we have our everyday life quarantine guidelines. If you are sick, we are asking, well, health authorities, that is asking you to stay at home for at least 3 or 4 days. Also, remember to stay 2 arms length away from others as part of social distancing to keep yourself safe as well as others. Wash hands for 30 seconds and cough into your sleeves. I believe we have our briefing starting right now. We'll come back to you afterwards.
설명이 있겠습니다.
Let us now begin our regular briefing for the COVID-19 response. As of June 3rd today, we have 49 more cases, and the total number of confirmed cases now stands at 11,590. 21 more people have been fully recovered, and a total of 90.3% have been discharged, while a total of 850 people are in quarantine. The death toll now stands at 273, with 1 more fatality as of yesterday. I extend my deepest condolences to the deceased and the members of the bereaved family. Yesterday, we have 49 new cases. 3 of them were imported, while 46 were local transmissions. Looking at the imported cases from overseas, we have 1 from America, 1 from India, 1 from the Philippines. And as of June 3rd noon, here are some updates to the local transmissions. And related to the club, we have 2 more additional cases compared to yesterday. And we have a total of 227 cases. And 96 of them were visitors to the club. And a total of 176 people were contacts. And at the Kupang Logistics Center cluster in Bucheon City, Gyeonggi-do Province, we have 2 more cases. In total, we have a total of 119 cases confirmed. And 74 of them are workers at the logistics center, and 45 of them are contacts. And in relation to the Incheon's newly planted churches, we have 10 more cases, and a total of 55 are in relation to this case. And we have the contact management and investigation into the sources of infection underway. 33 of them are from Incheon, 13 from Seoul, while 9 from Gyeonggi-do Province. And at the life insurance, we had 3 more cases, and the total now increased to 11 as of this business establishment. And in relation to the Incheon Gaeanggu family, which is the family which owns the real estate agency, we have new confirmed cases, and a total of 15 people have been confirmed so far. The case DC we are seeing also in relation to the multi-inflammatory syndrome for the teenagers and children, we have identified that these the suspected cases were not identified and defined as such syndromes. And the first case was an 11-year-old boy who returned from the Philippines and had fever after a few days and was also admitted to the hospital and suffered stomach ache and diarrhea. However, was discharged from the hospital. And this patient has stayed in the Philippines up until March. However, at our PCR and antibody testings, we did not find any confirmed cases of the COVID-19. And the second reported case was a 4-year-old girl, and this girl had a fever on the 10th of May and suffered from low blood pressure, fever, however, was discharged from a hospital on the 30th of May. We also conducted PCR testing, however, tested negative for the COVID-19, and there were no risks of the COVID-19 infection. Therefore, we did not define the case as the multi-syndrome. And also, in relation to this specific syndrome, we will be identifying the trends, and we will increase the surveillance against this disease. And starting from today, we have more students returning back to school, which is our third phase of school reopening. And we are also currently analyzing the results of the students' infections. And as of now, we had a total of 40,000 cases of suspected cases among the students, and 70 of them tested positive, which was about 0.14% of the total. And also, aside from the students who were classified as college students, we carried out an analysis of the 40 students, and 30% of them were infections through family members, and 14 of them, which is about 35% of the total, were in relation to the cram schools, and 4 of the cases were related to multi-use facilities, including singing rooms. As of now, there are no transmissions at schools. However, we are still monitoring as for the virus incubation period, and we are also curbing our efforts to contain the virus among school campuses. In order to deter the infections among schools, we also urge the students and faculty members and teachers who have fever or other symptoms to refrain from coming to school. And we also advise them to keep personal hygiene measures, including distancing measures, and also wearing a face mask. We also ask the teachers and students to refrain from going to multi-use facilities, including bars, singing rooms, and clubs. And before entering the school facilities, we ask all of the students and teachers to be screened of their body temperature. And if there is a confirmed case on the school ground, we will directly report this to the parents or the guardian, and we will take appropriate measures. And after one has been confirmed positive, this person will be returning directly back home. And even at home, we would advise them to reduce any contact among family members to curb the possibility of family transmission as well. In the metropolitan area, bars, private academies, PC rooms, and singing rooms are also subject to the administrative order that has been put in place by the central government to suspend operations. And if they need to operate, they need to have an accurate list of entry, and also restrict the people who have symptoms, and also return faculty or staff who have symptoms, and also have over 1 meter's distance with each other. And also they need to abide by the quarantine protocols strictly. And the local governments also need to continue to carry out intensified on-site monitoring and inspection for these facilities. The KCDC is currently providing and developing our therapies regarding the blood plasma of the confirmed patients, and this includes includes concentrating the antibody within the blood plasma of the patients who have fully recovered. Therefore, we are in need of more blood from the confirmed cases who have fully recovered. And for those who are aged over 18 and who have recovered from the disease over 2 weeks ago, are eligible to donate their blood. So please participate actively in blood donation. And we also encourage, especially in the metropolitan area, as we witness an increased risk of local transmissions among small groups, we advise everyone to refrain from going to enclosed crowded spaces, as this could lead to further widespread clusters. So we advise all of the residents in the metropolitan area to postpone or cancel any meetings or gatherings. And as for religious circles, we ask you to refrain from gathering together for dining, and please refrain from going to small meetings or small groups that have high risk of droplet infections. If you need to have on-site services, please abide by quarantine protocol. COVID-19 can spread very fast among enclosed, crowded, and indoor places. So we advise everyone to refrain from going to these places. And in your routine daily lives, please abide by daily quarantine routines as well. Thank you very much.
Right, that was Chung Young, the head of KCDC, with Wednesday's afternoon briefing. So, do give us a summary of the key announcements.
All right. Well, as we talked about before, today was the third stage of reopening of schools, and that's why KCDC Chief Chung Eun-kyung mentioned that continuous hygiene measures should be abided by the students as well as the teachers. And although, as she stressed, there has been no contraction at schools until so far, it is important that these measures are continued to be abided by, such as checking the body temperatures of the students as well as all the faculty members. And Chung also talked about the major cluster infections we had in the metropolitan area, one being related to a church where now 55 people have been confirmed with the virus related to small Protestant church gatherings. And then related to the club infection, the Itaewon case and the distribution center in Busan both only have now 2 additional cases, bringing the total to 272 in relation to Itaewon and 119 in relation to Busan. And Chung also asked for people who once had the COVID-19 condition and recovered fully from it to donate blood plasma so that the government and health experts can use those for research purposes.
All right, so thank you for that. We'll see you again tomorrow.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, over in the U.S., authorities in New York have issued an earlier curfew of 8 p.m. to last through the weekend, in line with efforts to stem the unrest that has gripped that city and, of course, many others across the country following the death of George Floyd, an African-American man, while under police custody. I have Reverend Daniel Lee, a Korean pastor and a trained nurse currently in New York, on the line with the latest on the situation there. Hello, Reverend.
Hello, how are you?
Fine, thank you.
Pleased
Thank you
to
for
be here.
agreeing to do this. Reverend, I understand the curfew in New York has been moved up to 8 p.m. as opposed to 11 p.m. This, I suppose, is tangible indication of the severity of the situation there.
Yes, last night was more serious and tense than tonight in terms of violence and more protests participating today. But the authorities want the situation to be better, so curfew moved up from 11 to 8 p.m. through Sunday. And last night, many protesters did not go home after the curfew, and there were more violence and dangerous situations, especially one unidentified car made a hit and run against a police officer in the Bronx, and some street fire was set, and some joined to protest to exploit the situation by stealing the goods and vandalizing the properties. And today, it seems like things are getting better. Even though more people are participating, they are more peaceful and they went home safely. And I have seen less violence. But the governor of New York State, Cuomo, ordered National Guard on standby and they are ready to be deployed on command. But he is reluctant to deploy as he's opposing the idea, unlike the President Trump, who encourages.
Reverend, there are pictures online of some law enforcement personnel kneeling in a show of solidarity to the protesters' cause. What has been the general public's response to the death of Mr. Floyd?
It is very serious. Many people, the community is saddened and experiencing pain and suffering. These police officers in New York City and many cities across America, they are kneeling down and hugging and praying together with the protesters. This is the great starting point to the right direction. But some elected officials, such as Governor of California and Minnesota, they are starting to give a hopeful message. It is not black people who caused this problem, but we are responsible. We are accountable. And Governor Newsom said that. And then also Governor Tim Walz started civil rights investigation by suing Minneapolis Department. But at this point, citizens in New York are still shocked, still disgusted by the casual manner that police killed Mr. George Floyd before their eyes in the video. They're upset beyond their words and frustrated over collective and long-standing racial injustice, economic and health disparity between black and white people. And communities are suffering at this time.
Reverend, there are also concerns that these massive public gatherings may fuel a surge in COVID-19 cases. Are health authorities there responding to these concerns?
Oh yes, that's so true. As a healthcare professional, I know that already 21,000 new cases happened during this mass protesting. And it's going to trickle big problem in the healthcare. There will be more hospital admission and intensive care need with ventilator usage, and followed by more death. And right now, people are very worried about this, but all the attention from the media and all the people's concern is geared toward the Mr. George Floyd is dead. So now people don't care as much as before about the COVID-19. They are more focused on this protesting and this issue.
All right, Reverend Daniel Lee in New York, do stay safe, and thank you very much for making the time to join us live at this hour.
Thank you for inviting. Thank you.
Now, up next, we share with you details from the latest weekly forum presided over by Prime Minister Chung Se-kyun, this time with the focus on efforts to expand Korea's social infrastructure for complete digitalization.
The Thursday conference has become a regular fixture in the South Korean government's ongoing response to the COVID-19 pandemic, providing an important platform for the free exchange of ideas on how to tackle the crisis and help prepare the country for the challenges still remaining ahead. The fifth edition of the Thursday conference, held on May 28, invited participants from the education, culture, and education sectors to discuss ways that Korea can adapt to the coming new normal.
이미 온라인 공간은 사람들이 일하고 만나고 생활하는 주된 공간으로 변하고 있습니다. 온라인 장치는 모든 세대에게 기본적인 생활 도구가 되었습니다. 전통 산업도 온라인 중심으로 재편되고 있습니다. 지금 우리 사회는 비대면을 뜻하는 언택트를 넘어 온라인 연결을 뜻하는 온택트 사회로 개편되고 있습니다.
Prime Minister Chung emphasized a rapid transition into a digital society as Korea's optimal strategy direction amid the wave of global changes.
AI, 빅데이터, 가상현실 등 4차 산업혁명 기술을 육성하고 데이터 인프라 구축, 비대면 서비스 산업 활성화 등 디지털 사회의 기반을 마련하는 것이 급선무입니다.
An urban planning expert at the meeting proposed that cityscapes must be redesigned to accommodate the emergence of non-face-to-face interactions in the post-pandemic era. He added that more spaces that promote social mix were necessary in the country's transition into a digital society.
이게 온라인 사회가 가속화될수록 SNS가 될수록 끼리끼리의 집단의 소통만 늘어나게 되고요. 집단 간의 계층 간의 소통은 더 줄어들게 돼 있습니다. 그래서 그런 것들을 소셜 믹스를 더 만들기 위해서는 그런 공짜의 공간이 더 필요한 거고요.
Education experts also weighed in on the future of learning and the fundamental paradigm shift necessary to adapt to the post-pandemic world. The expert called on the country to abandon its college entrance exams and the stratification of universities in order to shift the paradigm of education from meritocracy to one that is based on the more fundamental value of human dignity.
한국 교육도 이제는 근본적으로 새롭게 생각하는 입시 정책을 조금 바꾸는 수준이 아니라 이제는 우리가 새로운 인간을 키워내겠다고 하는 그런 근본적인 생각에서 해야 된다는 것이고요. 물론 용기가 필요하겠죠. 그래서 저는 교육 개혁이란 말을 안 쓰고 교육 혁명이란 말을 그래서 쓰는 것이에요.
The Fifth Thursday Conference explored the definition of what it means to be human in a post-pandemic digital world. The upcoming sixth meeting will invite public officials and experts to discuss the geopolitical fallout of COVID-19 and the coming changes in international relations.
This virus may become just another endemic virus in our communities, and this virus may never go away.
Quite a number of governments are choosing to ease quarantine restrictions to allow for a sense of normality, fueling debate over the wisdom of the move itself amid continued cases of COVID-19 worldwide. For more on the situation, I have Professor Kim Min-gyun from Sogang University.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome, Professor Kim.
Thank you for having me here.
And I also have Professor Mason Ritchie from Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Hello, Professor Ritchie.
Likewise, thanks for having me.
Professor Ritchie, let's begin with your thoughts on the easing of lockdowns in Europe and elsewhere. What are your thoughts?
Well, to begin with, I think it's time in many respects. The point of the lockdowns in most of the countries was to flatten the curve, as we say, to make sure that there's capacity in the hospitals, especially in the reanimation and the intensive care units, and that's largely been achieved. So at some point, we had to move on from this. It was neither possible nor desirable to have a lockdown that would last forever. And at some point, there's necessarily going to be a trade-off between public health and the economy, or better put, we've improved public health outcomes, so therefore we can start to turn to the economy. And throughout Europe, especially and in many other countries around the world, there's an attempt to try to balance those two things. So we see progressive opening in countries all over Europe, in Germany, in France, in Belgium, in Spain, in Italy, and most of the countries in Europe. And we're seeing that take place in different ways. Some places are opening schools up. Some places are starting to have their football leagues start back again, albeit without spectators. Of course, all of that's being done within the larger scope of social distancing. So I think it was necessary, and we're obviously all hoping that a second wave won't appear, at least in the near future.
Right. Professor Kim, what are your thoughts on the timing of these gradual reopenings of schools, like Professor Ritchie mentioned, and the economy in general?
Well, as he mentioned before, I think we have no choice. Basically, we're trying to put ourselves into the normal life, of course. Our students, our children need to go to school, and we have to make a living, basically, for economic basis. So I think it's kind of, it is kind of no choice that we are facing with those kind of COVID-19. But right now, I think we are lucky that we can control those kind of COVID situations. So maybe based on this control, we need to follow the guidelines, and we need to convert ourselves into normal life. So that I think I mean, in my opinion, basically, like, we cannot put ourselves into like before the COVID-19, but I think we do our best to have a normal life right now.
Right, to set up a new normal, perhaps.
Yes.
Professor Ritchie, how are members of the public in Europe responding to the easing in lockdowns?
Generally speaking, they're supportive, obviously in some senses apprehensive. When we talk about the public in Europe, of course, there are very different publics that have had some very different scenarios for their lockdown. Some places have been much stricter than others. For instance, France or Belgium. Other countries such as Germany or the Netherlands or Sweden have taken an approach that was either variable within their country, in the case of Germany, where the individual states made quite a number of decisions about how to handle this themselves. And in the case of countries like Sweden and the Netherlands, they had a relatively mild form of lockdown that looked a lot more actually like South Korea, although with worse results, which might have something to do with the technical capacity that they had for managing the contact tracing and the testing elements. And clearly the countries that have had the harsher lockdowns are appreciating this much more, obviously, and of course the ones that also have industries that have been hit very hard by the lockdowns are also appreciating it perhaps more than some others. So countries like France and Belgium and Italy that had very harsh lockdowns are obviously enormously grateful that we're perhaps moving on to a new phase. And then of course countries that have industries, notably ones that are related to, for instance, tourism, such as Italy or Spain, are also happy to see some of these lockdown measures that are finally winding down.
Speaking of industries that were hard hit, Professor Kim, in your opinion, which economic sector faced the brunt of the lockdown?
Well, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, basically, like whole the world economy has been hit so much. But if I try to pick the industry that is hurt by most, I think first one is like airline industry. Basically, due to the lockdown, basically we cannot move to like another continent, we cannot travel. Basically, that's kind of a lot of economic activity then create, especially I think it's created in Europe, of course, like Greece, Italy, like it's kind of the country that can generate a lot of revenue due to this kind of travel industry. So, but if you think about the airline industry, especially in Korea, like low cost LSE, like basically they're trying to go for get the fund from the government, but they have very hard time because basically, nobody is traveling. Even though we think about the shipping and all this international trade, but due to the corruption of the global supply chain, basically the shipping is not that. That industry is hurt too. Well, another industry that I can pick up is kind of the sports industry. Well, as he mentioned before, like in the U.S., like NBA, National Basketball Association, NBA stops and Major League stops, and in the England, basically one of the most popular sports, basically EPL, basically, and La Liga, they cannot play games. So all of those kind of industry, of course, that every industry is hurt by the COVID-19 pandemic. But I think the travel industry is kind of one of the the one that I can pick.
Right,
Yeah.
the one that's quite tangible.
Yes.
Now, before we delve any further into our discussion here in the studio, I'd like to direct your attention to two countries overseas that have adopted contrasting measures in response to COVID-19. I have Professor Ilmo Kesimaki in Finland with me. Professor Kesimaki, hello.
Hello, hello.
And I also have Professor Pavida Pananond in Thailand. Hello, Professor Pananond.
Hello.
Right. Professor Kesimaki, how are members of the public in Finland responding to the easing of lockdown?
Yes, so it has taken about 11, 12 weeks, and so at the moment the people are very pleased that the lockdown measures have been loosened down, and we have expecting this surely. So of course there are doubts, but the easing of the lockdown measures are gradually, in fact, so that only, for instance, restaurants are open only a limited hours per day, and they are closed quite early. So this is really gradual opening, not a full one.
I see. Professor Kesimaki, how are COVID-19 tests being conducted in Finland?
So we had some difficulties in supply of the test in the start, but at the moment I think the resources are at the right level. In fact, the pandemic situation in Finland is quite good at the moment, and in fact we have more capacity for tests than there is needed. So at the moment there are only 3,000, 5,000 tests, something between these numbers per day, and the capacity is maybe 2 or 3 times more than that. So
I see. Professor Pananand, over in Thailand, despite what is happening in Europe, Thailand, for its part, has decided to extend its state of emergency to late June. Please tell us why and the public reaction to this decision.
Yes, that is quite an exception for many countries. And I think that the official explanation from the government is that they want to be cautious in order not to let the second spike of the virus infection get out of control. But that's the official line. And I think many people see this as also excuse to extend the political control, because what you have to understand that what also comes with the state of emergency is the other laws that can control other aspects in people's life, such as freedom of expression and movement around the country. So I think we can say that critique of the government and people in general, particularly the business sector, is not very much agreeing that the extension of the state of emergency is extended until the end of June, which lead to the prevention of people movement. We still have curfew in Thailand from 11 a.m. until 4 a.m. and that inhibits a lot of the activities that can take place. For example, in restaurants, you are not allowed to sell alcohol, and people are not allowed to go out too late with the curfew. So those kind of issues get into the business and the economic aspect of recovery.
Right. And talking about the economic aspects of the decision, what especially are the prospects for the economy given this latest decision to extend the state of emergency, Professor Pananand?
Okay, if you look at Thailand, which is a country that is very much trade and tourism dependent. So with COVID outbreak in general, we already have a lot of impact on the disruption of supply chain, as already mentioned in this video, as well as a strong disruption to our tourism industry. And if you take the state of emergency lockdown into consideration, that adds up to the negative impact to the economy. For example, travel restriction to Thailand is also extended to the end of June. So that means that no tourists can arrive in the country before then. That hurts further the industry such as tourism, hotel and related industries. And it also hurts other service sector that also cater for domestic demand, such as shopping malls, food and restaurants and all that. So if you ask what are the economic fallout that is increased by the state of emergency, I think it adds to the impact that has already been there because of the COVID outbreak.
I see. All right, Professor Pananand and Professor Keskimaki, thank you very much both for making the time to join us live at the SAR.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Professor Kim, given the recent easing in lockdowns, are we seeing signs of a rebound in global economy, or is it too early for any tangible signs of a rebound?
Well, there are many predictions regarding the recovery process due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, we have three shapes of the recovery. First one was the V shape, and the second one was the U shape, and third one is the L shape. Basically, when COVID-19 pandemic happens, well, a lot of experts make a prediction on it's going to be the V shape. Basically, well, we're going to go through COVID-19 and we're going to control those viruses, and the economy will go up and with a rapid recovery. But as you can see, we can see those kind of situations. Well, V-shape is not our case right now, but it's kind of U-shape or L-shape. But as the COVID-19 gets worse, I think a lot of experts, including myself, they think that L-shape is kind of the shape. I mean, is the process that we're going to have in global economy.
I see.
Where
Professor Ritchie, I understand that EU members have been talking about possible economic measures to address the fallout from COVID-19. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Obviously, there are two levels of relief or stimulus, or however you want to call it. On the one hand, you have national measures. So, for instance, the German coalition government is working on a package between about 80 and I believe 100 to 110 billion euros, for instance, and that's on top of previous packages, as well as on their short-term work program, which is basically keeps people on payroll even though they're not actually working. They're sort of technically furloughed. France is working on a package of about 45 to 50 billion euros, as I understand it, and that's again on top of previous packages, as well as the unemployment system that they have there and other measures that they've taken economically. And then, in addition to that, you have the EU, which is working on a package. The European Central Bank estimates that over the 2021 to 2027 period, it will take about €1.5 trillion to relaunch the European economy. And to that end, they're working on currently a 750 billion, so about $825 billion package, which is likely to be funded through bonds, and that will be pumped into the economy in various ways. Some of it will focus on more immediate relief-related measures. Other things will be investment into 5G, into artificial intelligence, into infrastructure, into renewable energy, and things like that. So they are working on this. Whether or not it's enough, whether or not it will be timely, how much of it will be loans to be paid back over a long period of time versus how much to be will be grants, and how that will fit into the larger framework budget that the EU has over the 2021 to 2027 period are some questions that are still up in the air.
Right, only time will tell then.
Yeah.
All right, Professor Ritchie and Professor Kim, thank you very much for your thoughts today.
Great, thanks for having me.
Thank you for having me.
Right, well, that brings us to the end of this edition of COVID-19. Do join us tomorrow at this hour as we explore the facts and perhaps a little bit of the fiction surrounding COVID-19. In the meantime, do share your thoughts and inquiries with us through our social media accounts or our homepage, arirang.com. Thank you for being with us.